Ellen Clark was born in Massachusetts in 1826. She married Aaron Sargent and moved to Nevada City, California in 1852. Nevada City is an idyllic location, nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was home to early businessmen and politicians with ambitious goals. Meetings here led to the beginning of the Transcontinental Railroad and the first ever public waterworks. Then miners struck gold, and it propelled this area into national attention. Exciting progress was happening out west, and Nevada City was in the thick of it. Ellen was the mother of 3 and traveled to Washington, D.C. and Europe with her husband Aaron, an American journalist, lawyer, United States Senator, and a diplomat. Aaron Sargent was a man of his time and reflected the good and bad of the culture. On January 10th of 1878, Aaron Sargent requested that suffragists be allowed to personally address members of the Senate, and the following day they testified before members of the Senate Committee on Privileges and Elections. The world is better because of Ellen, and tonight we recognize the role she played in this amazing amendment. We honor all who helped and prevailed alongside her with tempered activism and unfaltering will. Tonight, from the Oddfellows Hall, we bring Ellen back for a visit from her life in 1901. She had just lost a legal battle over taxation on property without representation. Enjoy this glimpse into the past with one of American history's great influencers.
Good evening, Mrs. Sargent. May I call you Ellen?
Certainly.
Okay, great, thanks. So, you're living in San Francisco in 1901, and you sued the city for your paid property taxes. What made you think you could win such a case?
It wasn't so much that I thought we could win, but rather I wanted people to begin to think about what it means to be taxed without the right to vote. My son, George, was a lawyer, and I confess he was game for the trial. It was a proud moment to be represented by my own son.
I imagine. You were the treasurer for the National Women's Suffrage Association. Did your experience as treasurer help you decide to sue for your paid taxes?
This was far more important than my role as treasurer, though it did get me thinking. Why should any woman have to pay taxes to a government that won't let them vote, or for that matter, have fair representation? With my dear husband parted, the household finances fell to me.
Why do you think paying taxes should be tied to the women's right to vote?
The Declaration of Independence. It states that all men are created equal. This includes women. You know, at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and prior, it was recognized that all persons who were subject to the burdens of government, and women, specifically women as well as men, were entitled to participate in the control of such government. A denial of this right was a violation against the fundamental principles upon which our government is based.
Well, you remember the Boston Tea Party. That's a perfect example of taxation without representation, upon which this country was founded. So you lost your case, but do you think it helped you get the right to vote?
Absolutely. Even though we lost every motion, it got plenty of attention, and we won the press. Our goal was to secure the right for women of California and all American women to have equal rights to vote. Because of my court case, our membership grew, and the theme of the 1901 convention was taxation without representation is tyranny. We got the message across to a bigger audience than ever before.
So you have been described as persistent, tenacious, and you never faltered in your pursuit of the voting rights for women. What came next?
Well, I will continue to file tax protests and encourage others to do so. Can you imagine thousands of women rising together disputing tax payments? This woke folks up. It's a fine beginning for California to recognize women as full-fledged citizens with the right to vote. Women in Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, and Washington State have already been given the right to vote.
So women in California only got the right to vote after 5 other states?
Yes. My case tested the constitutionality of taxation of women without representation. And though we lost, it caused many to think. The Constitution of California provides all political power is inherent in the people. Let's make it so. Our goal was to secure the right for women in California and all American women with equal rights to vote.
So how long were we prepared to wage the effort?
However long it took, we were determined to get the right to vote. George established an impressive case. Now, all my children were raised from an early age understanding the fundamental nature of equality of gender. So really, this was nothing new for him. He'd heard me argue the point many times throughout his life at protests and gatherings. The law needed to be ratified to include all Americans, not just men and the wealthy. And the amendment had been proposed to the U.S. Senate and Congress for some 30-odd years.
Well, you don't look like a radical, but you're starting to sound like one.
Well, here I am at 74, a tax protester.
Yeah.
Why should any woman pay taxes to a government that won't let them vote? I've been made an anarchist by absurd laws.
So, power to the people. I think I've heard that somewhere.
Power in these 28 words that became the 19th Amendment of the Constitution. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied by the United States or any state on account of sex. I helped craft the 19th Amendment in order to make it more real for all women.
So this would have been a really big shift. As a matter of fact, the 19th Amendment is still being contested today and still shaping and protecting our rights. But in 1901, women having the right to vote would mean they could choose who represented them, who carried their wishes to the federal government, and it would even open doors for them to hold office. That's pretty radical for 1901. Women getting the right to vote is viewed as one of the 20th century's most important events, and the vote coincided with a growing, if gradual, embrace of gender equality, increased social spending, and a greater tendency among politicians to take a progressive stance on legislative proposals. So even if she doesn't know it, she is a radical, and frankly, she's a little bit more of a rebel than she's making herself out to be. So really, this was the first movement in America dedicated solely to women's rights. Would you mind talking a bit about how you got started?
Well, men were always going to their meetings at the Masons, the Odd Fellows, the Clampers. This is the way things were. And so women always had their own clubs right alongside the men.
Can you explain?
Men went to their meetings and women went to theirs. Okay. Well, women learned about officers and responsibilities, you know, basic protocol. Social clubs were a way for women to connect and, frankly, get out of the house. It deepened our relationship and broadened our horizons in the community, just like men.
What did your life look like in Nevada County in the 1800s?
Oh, my goodness. Well, each day was filled with children, politics, and household management. You know, no one really expected Nevada County women to grow to a national organization, except perhaps our leaders, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. While in Washington, I saw their view, and I supported it fully. I wanted this for Nevada City, not just Washington.
Washington, D.C., so wait a moment. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. First off, what brought you to California from Massachusetts? You weren't looking for gold, were you?
Oh, no. My husband brought me to California for his quest for gold. Oh, on the morning of October 23rd, 1852, we traveled by stage from Sacramento and arrived in Nevada, California that evening. Oh, that became Nevada City in 1886.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. I remember vividly the full moon shining on the beautiful hills and forest of trees. It was mostly pines. Oh, so different from the East. Everything seemed so quiet and peaceful. Made a strong impression on me, one I'll never forget. Oh, I get a bit sentimental remembering.
Okay. So what was your life, your family life like in Nevada City during the gold rush?
Oh my goodness. How do I explain? Everything was open, ready to be created, bustling with all kinds of life and energy. In the East, everything was so established. Preset, staid, conservative. We had a one-story house in Nevada City with 4 rooms on the corner of Broad and Spring Street.
Right up the street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, and Newburyport was tiny, less than 1,000 residents. And California was bursting with all kinds of people, all dreaming of something more and freer than where they came from. Around 1860, Nevada County women were outnumbered by something like 10 to 1,
Really?
which certainly was a novel experience.
I imagine Nevada County was very different from Massachusetts.
In every way. We were in a town that was being created in front of us each day. And as I said, in the East, everything was established, predictability that was absent here. It was exciting, and there was opportunity here that the East would not have tolerated. You know, moving to Nevada City was like jumping off the edge of the world. It was thrilling, romantic, and sometimes frightening. Oh, you know, California has always been well, actually out west, it's always been a place for dreamers, and Nevada City is no exception. You know, we dream, and because we dream, we reach for and achieve more in this world out west. You know, I often reflect that it was good that my parents, who were very straight-laced, did not come to Nevada City.
Okay, so as you've said, in 1860, Nevada County women were outnumbered 10 to 1. So what were the women of Nevada County like?
Oh, interesting question. Women of Nevada County were by and large respectable women. They were wives and mothers with middle and upper class backgrounds. Women of the gold rush tended to be strong, durable. After all, we braved the wild frontier or sailed around the Cape right alongside the men. You know, Nevada City voted early to allow women to hold businesses in their own names. This enabled them to participate fully in the economy. You know, many communities still did not allow women to own businesses in their own names.
So in other places, women couldn't even own a business.
No. Nevada City voted early to allow this. No, women panned gold side by side with their husbands, owned boarding houses, did laundry, and owned restaurants and even saloons. So this notion that suffragists were outsiders or destroyers is simply not accurate. I mean, women, sure. Working women were engaged in houses of ill repute for income. This was happening, but the vast majority of women were strong, forthright, and sought to build a better life for the family, which often had little to no mining income at all.
Do you think these non-traditional roles led women to seek the right to vote?
Yes, certainly. Gave them a taste of the world. The Nevada County women were key in winning the right to vote. The fraternal houses, like the Oddfellows, the Masons, and E. Clampus Vitus, helped form strong community ties. You know, these organizations were part of the early community fabric with dedicated and well-directed folks.
So you mentioned fraternal houses, social clubs like the Masons, the Oddfellows. Your husband was a founding member of the Nevada County Oddfellows in 1853. So what type of activities did you participate at the Oddfellows Lodge?
Well, women gathered to form our own community service.
What kinds of community service did these women groups do?
We raised money for widows and orphans, and after the first women's suffrage movement on the West Coast was formed in San Francisco in May of 1869, Nevada County and Nevada City women were determined to get the right to vote. Just 5 months, the Women's Suffrage Association of Nevada County was formed and began educating and campaigning in late 1869.
So what was daily life like in 1869?
Oh, I was very busy in those early years raising 3 children. My husband, Aaron, prospered in business, politics, and law. And I have been an advocate for women's rights for as long as I can remember, and he stood by me. It was, there was always something to do with politics or the household. Thrifty housewives could make a very good sweet cake, cornbread, or pudding without eggs.
Without eggs? Why did that matter?
Because eggs were hard to come by. And when you could find them, they were $5 a dozen. More than my groceries for the whole week.
Okay. So you traveled a lot, not only for the suffrage movement, but with your husband. This must have expanded your horizons as well as your work in Nevada City. So now, what was life like in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I lived in Washington, D.C. off and on for 12 years. Gave me great access to many progressive thinkers and to women committed to getting the right to vote. I saw how government ran. And it made me very aware of how important it was for women to vote. We didn't even exist to politicians.
So, do you feel that your husband stifled or took credit for your work?
Mr. Ewald, many people today seem to think that my husband somehow held me back or took credit for my actions. Nothing could be further from the truth. Has anyone ever stopped to think how I used Aaron's position constantly to achieve my goals? I totally used Aaron to meet people, influence others, and certainly to inform his opinion. Frankly, the notion that he used me is insulting.
So you used men. Have you ever heard the term reverse sexism?
No, I haven't. But I have to reflect that as a woman in politics in the late 19th century, I was able to navigate and successfully further significant social change, certainly noteworthy. And I used men to open the door so I could walk through it. That door needed to be opened.
Okay, fair enough. Do you feel that men were instrumental helping you move the vote forward?
Yes, they made up the elected government. And there was no going anywhere without men on board for change.
Do you think you would have gotten so far working for women's rights without your time in Washington, D.C.?
First off, if I'd never been to Washington, I don't think I would have ever met Mrs. Anthony. And certainly meeting her changed my life.
Susan B. Anthony.
Yes. She appealed to my husband, and he introduced us. After becoming acquainted in D.C., Mrs. Anthony came to Nevada City to help me with the suffrage movement. And during this time, we both saw that the vote was part of what was needed, but not everything. This was a time where we began to realize that there was something more.
How would you describe Washington, D.C. in comparison to your life in California?
Actually, the capital of our nation is thrilling and invigorating with great thought, society, and endless political agendas.
And is it really a new world for women?
Yes, even though it was stifling, rigid, and totally controlled by men. Certainly is better today.
We have some exceptional women in politics now, today, especially here in California. The Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi, California. We have Senator Dianne Feinstein and Senator Kamala Harris. And Senator Harris has just been asked to run on the ticket as Vice President of the United States in our coming election.
unimaginable in 1911. Good work. More to be done.
Okay, so Washington, D.C. Gave the reason to think. And then you met Susan B. Anthony.
Oh, Mrs. Anthony was an exceptional woman. She lived her Quaker beliefs, thought of others constantly. Based on our shared time in D.C., Susan supported my work here in Nevada City, and we became close family friends.
So was your husband concerned that your actions might have a negative effect on his political career?
Not at all. Mr. Ewald, he saw as I did that America is made up of both men and women. And by eliminating half of the population, half of its intelligence, inspiration and gumption is lost. Oh, the vote was critical because women are smart, capable, and compassionate. And by eliminating them, America was eliminating half of its most capable citizens. And believe me, I reminded him of that daily.
Did it occur to you that you might be targeted by anti-suffrage protesters?
The progressive movement in San Francisco was often stalled by parodies in the press proposed by anti-suffrage movements. So yes, I did know this. The press had a field day with us for years.
I actually have some of these paid political ads from your time. So I take a look at some of these.
All right.
Okay. So this first one, shows a gentleman standing out front of the town hall meeting, a women's town hall meeting, and it looks pretty exciting in there. And his line is, "What are the wild wives saying?"
Oh my goodness! You know, these press parodies were just that. None of our meetings were crazy like that. No women were fighting or raising weapons. And
so this is paid. This is a paid political ad.
Yes.
Showing the marginalization of a man because you're having your meetings. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is a gent. He's looks like he's doing some cleaning there and in front of the fireplace. His wife is standing over him, and his line is, "My wife's joined the suffrage movement, and I've suffered ever since."
You know, it's very difficult to respond to these because they are coming from a point of view that is trying to make the women's suffrage movement look bad and making men weaker. And that is unfortunate because women are strong and we have a point to make and we have a lot to say and a lot to voice. So.
But the shoe is on the other foot here because men are the ones who are voting, not women at this time. This is leading up to your getting the 19th Amendment.
I agree with you, but it's also trying to prevent women from even getting the right to vote.
I think that's the point, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple more. So this is a gent, he's doing the wash, he's got the baby, he's got the cat. Up above it says, "Everybody works but mother, she's a suffragette." So she's not working anymore because she's a suffragette. Down below, "I want to vote, but my wife won't let me." So, by women getting the right to vote, was that going to deny men?
Well, they thought so, or at least the people that were funding these pieces of trash. I must admit that these are rather amusing in retrospect. At the time, it was very upsetting because it was just wrong, it was misinformation.
Well, I think they're trying to stir up fear.
Okay.
Okay, another one. It's election day. So, the man has got the babies in his hand, and she's off to vote. So, what does this say?
This is saying women are off to vote, and I'm glad. Well, actually, you know...
Is it again saying the man is not going to get a chance to vote?
Well, of course, that's what it's presenting. It's saying that they're stuck at home, which is something women many times feel like they're doing because they're taking care of the household. So, yeah, you know, it's hard to really tell what they were really trying to
Well, she looks pretty smug. But I imagine at the time he already voted.
Well...
And now she's off.
Good.
Okay, one more.
All right.
I like this one. So, girls are doing all the fellows' jobs now.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, I didn't think you would. Okay. Okay, so what would set these people off? The people who paid for these.
Well, they were convinced that it was a greater freedom to stay in the home. You know, voting, developing the mind, assuming social responsibilities as citizens of this great nation was unheard of. No, of course men thought it was a great idea for women to stay home. They had a good thing going, and they were not going to give it up easily.
Okay. So I understand that there were anti-suffrage protests funded by liquor manufacturers, and that they saw strengthening women was strengthening prohibition. Is that true?
Well, yes. In 1896, San Francisco and Alameda counties were responsible for blocking women from becoming fully fledged citizens with the right to vote. These efforts were funded by producers of the drink, not a coincidence.
As a politician's wife and mother, were you ever personally affronted by the anti-suffrage?
Sure. We often held speaking engagements to educate women, and anti-suffragists were appalled at the tactics of suffragists. They rather regrettably believed that we had attacked the very essence of English womanhood. One time I came out of a meeting with Mrs. Anthony only to find a wall of protesters. We had to gingerly weave our way through.
Did you feel threatened?
No, not really, though it certainly was nervy on their part. Protests outside our speaking engagements were pretty common. Most women were puppets of industry. Industrialists hadn't realized that most of the household spending is done by women.
Yeah, I don't think corporations would figure that out for a while, that realizing the power of women. Protests are still something that happens today, actually. Only today, we have social media. So social media can spin it, and it just creates havoc.
In our case, history quieted our provocateurs. The San Francisco earthquake and fires of 1906 silenced the antis. Protesters had many concerns besides cartoons. Oh, San Francisco was in tatters. With the rebuilding effort, a sizable suffrage convention reignited.
So you're living in post-earthquake San Francisco. How did you manage to regroup?
New technology united us. In 1906, we had automobiles and telephones to carry our message to the smallest cities and counties throughout California. We even had a car named the Blue Liner to connect Northern and Southern California.
And I do imagine that cars were new technology. So with the creation of the movement, your goal was to get women the right to vote. Many people think that you're the backbone of the American suffrage movement, at least in California. Do you agree?
No. Certainly, the efforts of Mrs. Anthony and Mrs. Stanton cannot be underestimated, as well as the strong organizations and thousands of volunteers who supported our work, along with my family.
Okay, so nonetheless, though, you did play a key role in establishing the American Women's Suffrage Association in 1890.
Yes, they merged, and certainly getting the East and the West working together strengthened our movement and made it even more powerful. My work here was a factor, and the combined membership was 7,000 when they united, increasing to 2 million, which made it the largest voluntary organization in the nation.
Do you know that in 1920, the women's suffrage movement merged to form the National League of Women Voters? So, I see that the merger was officially completed in January 6th of 1920. And the League of Women Voters is still with us today. It's 100 years later. It's in 50 states, more than 700 communities, and now has 10 million members.
Oh, wow, wonderful. That's terrific. It's fabulous. Oh, how wonderful. It's wonderful to hear they're still thriving. You know, I worked for both suffrage organizations that became the League of Women Voters, doing whatever I could, from secretary to treasurer, whatever was needed.
So the League of Women Voters, its mission is loyalty, purity, and hope. Do you think this is a fair description of the direction you saw it?
Yes, we wanted to empower women. They raise children and see such different and vivid perspectives. Women are meant to help shape the world for good.
Okay, I'm struck by your devotion and how this cause affected your life. So at the time, your husband is gone, your daughters are gone, you lost your tax case. You're brave and determined, but what gave you the strength to carry on?
Well, it wasn't easy. Not having my husband and children was difficult. Eventually I returned to my normal tone of feeling and to the duties of everyday life. For we must go on living, even when dear friends drop from sight. I don't know that I want any more from my life, but I'm always hoping that I may do a little for the world and that it may be better for my having lived in it.
Looking at the world today, what changes would you make?
I'd like to give women more confidence and respect for their ability. I'd like to see all women participating fully in the economy, society, and having a say in how government is run.
And how would you propose to do it?
Education and community participation. You know, Mr. Ewald, my work at the Century Club in San Francisco was to educate women on their powerful role as mothers. Shaping young minds is certainly no light task. Perhaps a future generation may recall that if a shy woman from Massachusetts could change a society, then change is within reach.
One last question. What's your favorite word?
Vote.
I didn't see that coming. Okay, Ellen, well, thanks so much for coming back to us 100 years later here in Nevada City, the home of the 19th Amendment, your former home. Thank you. And thank you for being here. And I'd like to remind you to vote every chance you get. It's a privilege that was hard fought for. Thanks and good night.
Ellen died on July 13, 1911, in San Francisco during the campaign for women's right to vote. San Francisco held the city's first public memorial for a woman, with an American flag flown at half-mast, and several thousand people attended her memorial service at Union Square. At the time, it was reported it was her strong conviction that the ballot in the hands of women would help redeem the world. Thank you to the famous marching presidents who inspired and sponsored this evening's conversation. The Famous Marching Presidents is a unique group consisting of all 45 presidents and first ladies supporting the Constitution Day Parade each year since 1988 in Nevada City, California. Thank you again for joining us, and choose to vote.